In this video, I'm going to walk you through setting up a Roll20 game from scratch. So if you're brand new to Roll20, this video is for you. I'll cover creating a game, inviting players, setting up characters and tokens, how to work with maps, and getting monsters on the board. In a future video, I'll cover combat, navigation, and a few other topics, but for today, we're just focused on getting a scenario set up for our players. And I should mention that everything I'm going to show you is going to use free resources. You're not going to have to spend any money to get your game up and running. All right, let's dive in. So the first thing I'm going to do is click the Create New Game button, and we'll give our game a name. I'm going to call this the Kobold Dungeon Exploration. All right, so there we go. And then we're going to choose a character sheet, and the sheet you choose depends on which game system that you're playing. I'm going to go with D&D 5e today. And that's it. That's all I have to do to set up a new game. We'll click the I'm Ready Create Game button. And here we are, Kobold Dungeon Exploration. So our game has been created. Now we want to invite some players to play in our game. So we'll click on the Invite Players button over here. And that pops up this dialog box that you can fill in your friends' email addresses here and send an invite. Or if you've already got a Discord server or a Google Hangout or something set up, you can just copy this link right here and throw that into your Discord server, and then all your players can just click on that link and they'll be able to join the game that way. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take that link and I'm going to put it into my Discord server, which is off on the other screen here. I'm going to have one of my players click on it. Okay, she's done that. And now when I click refresh, you'll see, okay, now I have a player in my game. So Daisy has joined my game. Fantastic. So let's go ahead now. Let's launch the game. Let's start getting some things set up inside of it. So now that my game's launched, I'm going to come over to the settings gear here on the far right of the screen, and I'm going to tweak a few of the settings in here. The first thing I'm going to do is enable this Use Advanced Keyboard Shortcuts box, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I'm also going to scroll down here, and I'm going to go to the Chat Avatars section. And this is where you set how big your avatar is. Your avatar is this glyph right here. Personally, I like to just show names because that gives me more real estate to work with on the screen. But if you'd prefer to have there be small icons or something like that, then by all means, whatever works best for you. Under the video and audio chat options, this is where you can choose whether you're going to have Roll20 handle the video and audio communication for you, or if you're using Discord or Skype or something else, you can set this to be none, and then it's not going to use any of that. And if you're not planning on using Roll20 for your video and audio, I recommend turning that off just so that you don't have to spend system resources on it. Okay, and that takes care of those settings. So now I've got advanced keyboard shortcuts turned on, I've made my players just show up as their names, and I've turned off the video and audio. Now we have just a blank canvas to work with here. We need a map, right? That's the first thing that I want to set up in here is a map for my players to explore. So, out on the Roll20 Wiki, and I'll drop a link to this down in the description, there are a whole bunch of different mapping resources available to you. Different online tools, different sites that already have maps pre-made. Some of them are paid, some of them are Patreons, some of them are free. What I'm going to do right now is go to this dungeon channel, and on the dungeon channel, they have this dungeon generator, and this lets you just build a random dungeon that will be completely compatible with Roll20. So just going to make a couple of quick changes to the settings here. I'm going to have this be tiny because I don't want a really huge dungeon right now. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. We'll generate this, and that gives us this map right here. All right, perfect. So I can use this in my Kobold dungeon. So I'm going to take this image. I'm just going to right click on it. I'm going to save the image. All right, I'm going to leave the default name, all that. That's great. So let's go ahead. Let's get this map now into our game. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to go to the Art Library, which is the second button over here on the toolbar. And I'm going to go to My Library, and I'm going to say Upload. And this lets me browse out to wherever I have that file on my computer. Here's the one that I just did. And that's going to upload the file into my game. Now, one thing to mention about when you're uploading files into Roll20 is that a free Roll20 account has a limit of a 5 megabyte upload. So if you've got a really huge map and you're on a free account, you'll need to save it in a different format or downsize it or something like that because you can only upload 5 meg files in a free account. All right, but there we go. I've just done that. You see, here's my new map that I've just uploaded. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is just drag this right onto the board. There we go, but that's really tiny. Okay, so that's not exactly what we want for a map, right? So what we want to do is resize this to the appropriate dimensions. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to right-click on this guy, and we're going to say Advanced, Set Dimensions. And you notice here, in the Set Dimensions dialog, you've got two options. You can go pixels or units. I'm going to switch this to units. And what units means is how many squares wide and how many squares tall is the map. On the dungeon page, it told us it's 21 squares wide by 28 squares tall. So we're just going to use that. All right, so it's 21 squares wide by 28 squares tall. And we'll set that. Okay, and there we go. The map will take a second to refresh. There it is. Now what I'm going to do is just drag this so that the map is in the corner of the page. There we go. Okay. Now, though, you'll notice if I zoom out, the page that I'm on is not sized properly for the map. It's too wide and it's not tall enough. So what we're going to do to fix that is we're going to click on this page toolbar, and this shows us a list of all the pages and all the battle maps that we have so far. So we're on this one. I'm going to click on this page settings icon, and I'm just going to change the dimensions here. So this map, if I look at it again, was, if I really squint on this, in fact, if I zoom in on this guy down here, it's 1470 tall by 1960 pixels high. So 1470 tall by 1960 high. And we'll save settings. Close this, and now you see the page is exactly the right size for the map. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got this sized properly. But now what I want to do is talk about layers. The Roll20 view that we're looking at right now is actually made up of 3 different layers. There's the map layer, the object layer, and the GM layer. The map layer is your background. It's something that all your players can see. So any battle maps, scenery, environmental things that you want to be part of the experience, but not necessarily something that a player could interact with, should be on the map layer. So what I'm going to do is right-click on this and say Layer, Map Layer. And that moves the map to the map layer. You'll notice now I can't move it or anything anymore. And that's because my focus is not on the map layer. My focus is on the token layer. That's the layer that has focus by default. So to change that, you click this button up here. We say Map and Background. And now we're on the map layer. That would let me move things around. And if I want to go back, I can go to the token layer. This is part of the reason why I said you should enable the keyboard shortcuts, because going over to this utility, especially on a big map, can be kind of tedious. So when you have advanced keyboard shortcuts turned on, pressing the letter M on your keyboard changes you to the map layer. And you notice right here, the icon changed. So on the map layer right now, if I press O, we go back to the object layer, and then K gets you to the GM layer. And we'll talk more about the GM layer later. The last thing I'm going to do for the map is go back to the page toolbar here, and I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to call this, say, Level 1. So we've got our map set up. Now let's populate the map with some monsters. Since I'm doing this as the Kobold dungeon, kobolds make sense. We're going to go over in the toolbar here to the compendium icon. It's the one that looks like the letter I in a circle. Now the compendium is where all the information about all the monsters in the SRD are available. It has information about certain magic items, about armor, about game rules. All that stuff is available in the compendium. So what I want to do is get a kobold out of the compendium and onto the map. We'll start typing in kobold, and that's going to bring up some monsters here. So I'm going to just drag my kobold onto the map. And this pulls up the kobold's character sheet, so I can see the traits that the kobold has, their attacks. The character sheet itself is where we see all their stats. And then we're not going to worry about attributes and abilities here. We're just going to stick with the character sheet and the bio. And you see now it put the kobold on the GM layer. This is super important. Whatever layer currently has focus is the layer that the object you drag on is going to show up. Now, maybe you want to put your monsters on the GM layer because things that are on the GM layer are only visible to you as the GM. So if you want something to surprise your players, you've got monsters laying in wait, you've got a trap that's going to spring, something like that, put those things on the GM layer and then your players won't see them until you're ready to reveal them. For right now though, I want to have my monsters on the object layer or on the token layer. So I'm going to right click on this guy, I'm going to go layer, I'm going to move him to the token layer, and then I'm going to press O on my keyboard. That puts my focus back to the object layer, and now any more monsters I drag onto the board will be automatically placed on that layer because it's the one that'll have focus. So as you see, the kobold right now has this very generic person icon. And I would much rather have some sort of artwork for my kobold. So for this, we're going to go back to that art library button. And I'm going to go down here to the free assets. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that you can use in your game. What I want to focus on right now is this one, goblins and kobolds. And you see here, there's a handful of different kobold styles. I kind of like this guy right here with the spear and the shield. So I'm just going to drag him right onto the board, and he's put automatically onto the token layer. And let's zoom in on this so it's a little easier to see. There we go. So that'll bump it up to 100%. Now, a handy shortcut that you'll want to remember is hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and double-click on a token. And when that happens, it opens up the token's character sheet. If you just double-click on the token itself, you get the settings for that particular token. So Alt double-click opens the token's character sheet. This will be really handy for when you're running combat. And if you want to keep the character sheet handy, double-click on the title bar here, and that minimizes the sheet so you can move it around and then double-click again to bring it back. And that way, when you're running combat with your monsters, you can switch between different character sheets really easily without having to double-click on the token itself again. But in that piece of artwork I just dragged on, if I hold down Alt and double-click, it just gives me the token settings for that item because this token is not connected to a character sheet. You see, this guy right here represents character, doesn't represent anybody. Yet this one, if I double-click on it, says that it represents character kobold. So what we need to do is double-click on the artwork and say that it represents the kobold. Let's save this for a second. And now if I Alt double-click on him, there we go, it opens up the kobold character sheet. Well, actually what it did, if you noticed, if I do this, it just moved this guy a little bit because the character sheet's already open. So if I close that, there it comes back, all right? And it came back minimized. I've maximized it. We go from there. So that's cool. But now you notice there are these 3 circles above the artwork. All right, so let's double click on the token again. Those 3 circles correspond to the bar values that you see right here. And what we can do is set it up so that these circles display information about our kobold. So I want this bar 1 value, the green one, I want that to be their HP. So I'm going to select HP from this attribute list. And if you start typing the item that you're interested in, it will show up here. And you see out of 5. So that's the maximum value being read off of the character sheet. I'm just going to go ahead and say that they have 5 out of 5 hit points. Bar 2, which is going to be the blue one, I like to make that the armor class. All right, so that's 12. And then bar 3 really is up to you. Personally, I like to make that one for D&D 5e, I like to make that the passive perception score. So, or passive wisdom. And that way, if my players are trying to, say, sneak past the kobolds, or if they're making noise or whatever, I want to see if the kobolds notice them. I know their passive perception score very easily without having to look it up. So I'm going to click save here. And now you notice those things have all been populated now. There's my HP, there's my armor class, there's my passive perception, and all that's set for my kobold. Now, I don't want to have to repeat that work every time I bring out a new kobold. What I'd like to do is just be able to go back to my compendium, drag a new kobold onto the board, and have it automatically have the artwork and the bars assigned to it. So the way we do that is by opening up the character sheet. So again, we'll just Alt double click on our kobold. And what we're going to do is click this edit button. And on the default token section, we're going to say use selected token. And what that does now is it says anytime we drag a new kobold out from the compendium, it's going to use the artwork and the bar setup for this specific token right here. So if I save changes now, all right, we'll close this, and I drag out a new kobold, there you go. You see he's got the bars set up and he's got the right artwork. So now I'm going to grab a couple more kobolds, just pull them out here and get them into position. And I'll delete the other ones that have the generic token. But there's one more thing that I want to point out with the setup here, and that is if I click on this guy and I change his HP, right? I'm going to just change this to be 3. Maybe he's taken damage. You notice all of the tokens had that same change applied to it. The reason for that is all these tokens are sharing the same character sheet. So when a value gets changed for one of them, it gets changed for all of them. That's okay for things like armor class or passive perception, but HP isn't something you want to do that for. You want each kobold to have their own independent HP. So we're going to make one more change here. I'm going to double click on the token again, and in the bars setting, all right, so let's restore this guy to full HP. And in the bars here, we're going to set this attribute to be none. What that means is when we've set this to none, is this value is not connected to any particular attribute on the character sheet. We set it to HP to start with because that populates the value for us. But after that, we're going to set it back to none. And then we'll save. And now what I'm going to do is open up the character sheet again. All right, so Alt double click. Go back to the edit screen. I'm going to remove the existing token and replace it with this updated one that has the HP bar set to none. Save changes. Okay, now when I drag out a kobold and I adjust his HP, you see it only adjusts it for him. So if I adjust by another -2, he's down to 1, and the other ones are all as they were. So I'm going to delete these guys that are set up with the linked HP. I'm just going to bring out some fresh ones. And there we go. Now I have all my kobolds have independent HP. So if one of them takes damage, it only applies to that one token. So our maps are set up. Our monsters are set up. Now we need to get our player characters set up. So I'm going to click on the journal button up here. And the journal button is going to show you a list of all of the monsters and player characters and any handouts that you've created for your game so far. And right now, all we have is our kobold. I want to add a character for Daisy, who's the player I invited at the beginning of this video. So what I'm going to do here is click the add button, and we'll say we're going to add a character. By default, Roll20 generates a random name for the character. You can leave that as it is because Daisy's going to set up her own character however she likes. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. In players' journals, I'll set that to be all players. That'll let all the players in the game see that there is a character called Jicky, but only this player will be able to control or edit Jicky's character sheet. So I'm going to assign this to Daisy. So now what will happen is Daisy will log into the game. She'll see that there is a character sheet for her, which is default named Jicky, and then she'll be able to run through, change the character's name, set up all the character stats, all that good stuff. That's outside the scope of this video. This one we're focusing on you as the GM. So your players will take care of their own stuff. You're setting up just this character sheet for them to start with. So we'll click Save Changes here. And now Wiki shows up in the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. This blue dot means that Wiki is visible to players in some way, whereas the kobold is not. So your players can't access the kobold's character sheet, but they can see Wiki's, and my player Daisy will be able to modify and work with Wiki's character sheet. But you'll notice if I drag Wiki onto the board, Wiki has the same issue as the kobold token had originally. It's this generic artwork with nothing in the bars. You're going to do the exact same thing for your player characters as we just did for the monsters. So off camera, Daisy's been making Wiki's character sheet. She says she likes the name Wiki, so we'll stick with that. And she says that Wiki is going to be a wizard. So what I'm going to do is go back to the art library, and under this characters section, I'm going to grab a wizard, and I'm going to drag that onto the board. Now, you can rotate this if you want to. You can grab this guy right here and spin him around. Totally up to you if you want to do that. But I'm going to double click on this token now, and I'm going to assign that to be Wiki. And then just like before, I'm going to go through, I'm going to set up Wiki's HP. And for this, we can leave it as the HP. We don't need to worry about unlinking the HP afterwards because we're only going to have one Wiki on the board. So just like before, we'll do Wiki's AC, the HP, and I'll do the passive wisdom again. There we go. We'll save the settings. And then just like before, we're going to Alt double click. We'll go to Edit, and we'll say Use Selected Token. Save that. And now whenever we drag Wiki out onto a new map, like if I delete Wiki right now, and we'll delete the original one too, and I go back to the journal, there's Wiki, I can just drag Wiki on, and there we go, Wiki comes in, and all the bars are pre-configured. So that's fantastic. Okay, now one last thing I'm going to mention before we sign off today, and that is keeping things organized in your journal. So your journal is where all of your character sheets, all of your monsters, all of your handouts, everything that you're using in the game is going to be stored. And right now we just have Wiki and this kobold. That's not much, but we're going to have more players. We're going to have more monsters. And as our game grows, this list is going to get unwieldy very fast. So what we want to do is build in a way to organize all of our stuff. And the way we can do that is with folders. So I'm going to click on the Add button. I'm going to say Folder. And I'm going to call my folder PCs. So this is just where my player characters go. All right, so you see we've got our PCs here. Folders in Roll20 are a little different from folders on your Windows system, for example, because a folder has to be open in order for you to be able to drag something into it. How do you tell if a folder is open? Well, it's if it has this little minus icon next to it. So right now, it has a plus. That means it is collapsed. I can't drag things into it. It has to be open. It has to have a minus sign next to it. And the way we add things to it is you hover over the item you want to move so that you see these little bars here, these three lines. Keep your mouse over those three lines and then drag. And you see now we've got an empty space that shows up indented under the name PCs. That means I'm dragging this into the PCs folder. If it's collapsed, if it has the plus sign, it won't let me drag inside of it. So make sure this is open, and then you can drag things in to your folders. So I've got one for PCs. I'm going to create another one for my monsters, and I'll put my kobold into that. Okay, and then this guy, I'm just going to delete this folder right here. And I don't have any handouts yet, but as I make them, they'll show up in here. So now we've got a nice organizational structure for our monsters, our PCs, our handouts, and as we move forward in time, we will add more things to this game. But we're going to stop this video here. In the next video, we'll talk about running combat, doing initiative, attacks, and damage, and how all that works. But until then, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And until next time, folks, have a great day.